Hey YouTube, this is 4-Pack Daddy. Today we're going to be discussing one of my favorite parts of video games, and that's pro wrestling video games. Now, some people like them, some people hate them, and some people don't like wrestling in general. But I think wrestling games really, they've come a long way. But also, there's some games that paved the way that never have been seen like this before, especially for one right here. This is probably my all-time favorite. I grew up watching WCW, and Revenge is definitely a favorite of mine. The best thing about it is the gameplay. I mean, you have a legendary engine. The developers really know what they were doing. It was published by THQ, and it's the AKI engine, which is famous for making No Mercy and WrestleMania 2000. And so it's just really unique. I'm glad to have this complete in the box because the artwork is really cool. He was my favorite wrestler back in the day, Goldberg, and I believe he is the Universal Champion as of late, if you've been following WWE at all. But in terms of gameplay, I mean, there isn't any rival to this, in my personal opinion. And I just think this is a great game on Nintendo 64. A lot of people played it. I used to play it with my family and my friends a lot. We're going to talk about a few of these. So the next one here, WrestleMania 2000, which is another one of my favorites. It's probably one of my favorites of WWF video games for N64. They really stepped it up with this because unlike this game right here, this has wrestler theme songs and entrances. Whereas we had, I think it was just two generic songs, one for the first team or the first player, and then another song. It's just basically just default songs they use for each character, which is fine because it's more of a gameplay-based game anyway. But I love that they took it one step further with this. Now, what I mean by that, this runs off the same engine, the AKI engine, the famous wrestling game engine that I wish they would bring back. And so they decided to add a lot of wrestler theme songs. I mean, the pitches are off and things because it's on a cartridge game. It wasn't on a CD like the PlayStation. I mean, the PlayStation had some good wrestling games for sure, as we're going to go over a few of them here. But WrestleMania 2000 was really good because of that feature. It had all the theme music for most of the WWF wrestlers at the time. So this is a really good one to pick up. Then next we're going to continue with 64 here. Of course, we had to talk about No Mercy if we're going to talk about great wrestling games. This is considered by many to be the best N64 wrestling game. And for the most part, I mean, it is in terms of gameplay and features. The entrances are shorter than in WrestleMania 2000. For example, they just show them at the entrance ramp, and then that's about it, and it cuts to the next wrestler's entrance. But it's a minor detail when you think about how great the gameplay is. I mean, these games rivaled modern fighting games of that era. So, I mean, these were really a lot of fun, and a lot of people have memories with them. And the last 64 game I want to talk about, which is kind of controversial, but it was also pretty ahead of its time, was WCW Mayhem. Now, I say ahead of its time, it was in terms of the wrestler theme songs, which were actually very good for the time. All the wrestlers had their proper theme songs, except some of them were weird because there was changes happening with NWO at this period of time when WCW was on its decline in the late 90s. But the great thing about this particular game is the commentary. To this day, wrestling games have not had as good commentary as WCW Mayhem, in my opinion. You had Tony Schiavone exclusively just on here, and then you had Tony Schiavone with Bobby the Brain Heenan, which the PlayStation version is superior because it has extra dialogue from the two commentators. But even in 64, the gameplay, like I said, it's not really as good as these, but it has a really good handful of popular characters. You had multiple iterations of Sting. You had a lot of characters, including Ric Flair, which was absent in WCW Revenge. So you really had a good game here. I actually found this locally a few years ago, sealed for like $10. So I was pretty happy to have that because I don't have many N64 games with everything that came with them. So it's pretty cool to have that in my collection. Now we're going to get into a little bit more modern here. And we're going to talk about SmackDown Here Comes the Pain on one of the greatest consoles of all time, the PlayStation 2. This is my favorite of the PlayStation 2 era games. It had great characters, great graphics, and it played extremely fast. What I mean by that is everything was sped up, like the moves, the punches, the kicks, the weapons. Everything was fast-paced, and I loved that about this game. And it came out, I believe, around 2003, that era. It is definitely ahead of its time in terms of gameplay. And the graphics still hold up today. I mean, you can see some of the character shots here. I mean, it looks great. You know, even today, you could pick this up and, you know, and enjoy it. And for the PS2, you can't get much better than this game right here. Now we're moving on to the PlayStation 3, which I believe, in my personal opinion, this is the best of the 2K branded wrestling games, because it had probably the best roster ever. I mean, it had so many great legends. You had, you know, Ultimate Warrior, Ric Flair, Andre, Hulk Hogan, you know, of course. And I'm glad that WWE has reinstated him into the company. I think it was a good move on their part. But this game, in terms of roster, I mean, you couldn't get any better than this. Plus, they revamped the gameplay to be more similar to the 64 titles. So that's why this is probably the best, in my opinion, of the 2K games. Then lastly, we're going to talk about both 2K18 and 19. We don't talk about 20 because 20 was an utter failure for many reasons, and many fans are very disappointed because the series had been on a pretty upward trend. 2K18 was pretty good, had good gameplay, the graphics were impressive. It had a decent story mode from what I've heard. I haven't really played much of it, but I've played enough gameplay to know that they did revamp the gameplay quite a bit for this, but it still isn't as good as this. And then 19, this was actually, so far of the modern wrestling games, like we're talking about the mid-2010s, this is probably, well, I guess after 2014, this is probably my favorite one. They had really good gameplay, and I think the good thing about the newer WWE 2K games is that when you go to the community creations, because that's where these really shine, is the creator wrestlers and the arenas that you can download from other people. So you can get some really good creations for people like Chris Benoit and wrestlers that are probably never going to be in this game. Even current AEW stars, people I've uploaded, and I've been checking on this. But I refused to pick up 20 because 20 just was, it was full of glitches on launch. It looked even worse than this game did. And this game has some excellent graphics. But 2K20, they really dropped the ball. I mean, some people still picked it up for the community creations, which I understand, but it wasn't as good. So anyway, this is just a quick overview of some of my favorite wrestling games of all time. Let me know in the comments below, what are some of your guys' favorite wrestling games? What memories do you have? And thanks everybody for watching, and I'll speak with you soon. Bye-bye.